Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one.
All right, so I think this will be our last class about writing an offer. We've gone through to very detailed, making sure that we're writing a clean offer, make sure that we're writing as strong an offer as possible, right? That the idea is that in this market with the competition, what it is for buyers, and when we do get a buyer, especially right with the buyers pool is a little bit smaller, and especially that the listing inventory is a lot less than we would like it to be. We've got to be spot on with everything we do if we want to give our buyers an opportunity to get their offer accepted, right? So, any questions before I share my screen and jump back in? No, all right. Let's get going then. All right. You guys should be looking at the RPA right now, and we're looking at paragraph 3Q1. Now, we finished last week talking about items included and excluded in the sale. And so we will move on to the next paragraph, which is 3Q1. That's the natural hazard zone disclosure report, including tax information. Look, in most markets, but in this one especially, I believe that we should be doing all of the services as seller's choice, unless there's a very specific reason that we need to use our service. It's nice to try, but we know that we're going to get countered. We know that the chances of a listing agent not getting their services are slim. So again, paving the way to have a more acceptable offer, to get an offer that's easier to be accepted, then we need to, right? Those are the things that we need to do. Give the seller the choice instead of, like we talked about 2 weeks ago, removing contingencies on our own without being requested, and then asking for our services, right? Let's be reasonable about that. So natural hazard zone disclosure, the norm is it's the seller that pays that, so we want to check that. If there's any of the other records that you want to include, like an environmental or insurance or taxes, you would check that off. This is the one thing I see missed on offers all the time is the provided by, and that's what I was talking about a moment ago, is the seller's choice, right? That's what I was talking about, and that gets missed so often. Every time people bring me an offer to review, I always look here because those services provided are not there. Okay, so seller always provided by seller's choice. Again, feel free, if you feel like that's what you guys want to do, is ask for your service provider, ask for them. But the chances are that most people are going to be countering you back to change it to all services. So might as well just, again, to make things easier, do it that way. Next up, these two right here, Q2 and Q3, are for any reports that are not already mentioned in the report, in the offer, right? Now, I always advise that you guys do not ask for a termite report. Always. You should never. The only time that you might want to ask for the only time that you ask for the termite report is if your offer is a VA offer, because that has to be done. Okay? So VA offer has to get done, so you could ask for the report here. Otherwise, I wouldn't. But if it's something that you feel is a necessity, that you have to ask for the termite report, this is where you would do it, and you would write wood destroying pest Okay, and then you would ask for the seller to pay for it. That's it. That's only the report. The repairs would go somewhere else. And if you're going to ask for the report, you got to ask for the repairs. But that's going to go in another place. Jasmine raised her hand. So, what can we do for you, Jasmine?
Hi, Kyle. Really quick on Q1, can you just refresh my memory with natural hazard and environmental? I mean, it does can you just briefly say what those disclosures are about?
Well, the natural hazard zone disclosures are a report from a third party company that replaced the natural hazard statement from the seller. And what that is about earthquake, floods, and fire zones, natural hazards. So that's what that is. The environmental thing would be if there was something like if you were looking at maybe if there were residential surrounded by industrial, you'd want to do some kind of environmental survey to make sure that there's nothing other than like nothing that's not natural, fire, flood, earthquake, that kind of stuff.
So we
But
don't
that's
really
what
have to
that
mark
report
those.
is. You don't
Okay,
really
so
have
we
to
don't
mark
really have
what.
to mark the environmental when
No,
we
you
write
don't
up
need
the
to.
offer.
No, you don't need to.
Okay, okay, just checking. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Just moving on. So again, this is only for the report. Go ahead, Jesus.
Hi, Kyle. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, to Jasmine. The environmentals you don't have to. However, I think it's like $5 more, and it will give you a lot of information. The NHC will give you and provide more information for $5. The seller's paying for it anyway. So my suggestion will be always ask for it. If you actually read it, it's very informative. You don't have
Thank
to,
you,
but it's
Jesus.
best.
Appreciate that.
Thank you,
Thank you for the
Jesus.
heads up.
All right. Moving on. So again, if you're asking for the wood destroying pest inspection, that's where it's going to go, not the clearance. This does not include the clearance. This is reports. You see, report. The clearance is going to go in a different section. Okay. This would be any other report that you might ask for. I don't know if you want to ask for a soil stability test or, maybe you already know that it's in a high fire zone and you want to ask them to get the report from the city about the shrub clearance and the fire safety and those reports that show up in that fire hardening disclosure. Regardless, this is reports and reports only. Okay. Questions about this, about the report, about the thing. But before you answer questions, don't do this. Don't put this in. Don't ask for it. If you want to get a termite report, you do your own during your inspection period, and you can ask for a request for repairs. Don't ask for it. There's two reasons. Number one is it weakens your offer because most people aren't asking for it. Number two, if the seller does accept for there to be a report, right, for them to provide the report, then the lender's going to require a clearance. The lender's going to require a clearance, and if the seller doesn't want to do the clearance, then your buyer's going to have to do it. And if your buyer can't do it or won't do it, then you're going to ultimately end up not being able to fund the deal. So leave it out. Leave it out. Okay. Questions about that, about 3Q2 and 3? Anybody? No. All right. Let's move on. Smoke alarms. Go ahead, Lizette.
Hi, Kyle. In reference to the clearance, if we get an offer from a buyer's agent that puts it on the report, do we tell on the offer? Do we tell them to redo that, or how do you want us to have them take it
Well,
out?
if I were you, I'd be countering it out altogether that you're not going to provide them with a report or do the clearance.
Okay, so once you do it
yeah, once you count, but you have to be specific to it. That's a thing that's very important, is that you guys have to be specific. We've had a number of times where a counter from a seller says, "Oh, no repairs," but they don't specify that they're not going to do the termite report. And when there's a specific request, your response has to be specific to that request. You can't do it with a blanket statement of no repairs, because then people assume you're just talking about general repairs to the property. So If I'm you as a listing agent and I ever get an offer that requests a termite report and clearance, I'm going to counter back that the seller will not provide a termite report, nor will they provide a clearance. Even if I already have a report, I might give it to them, but I want it out of my offer because I don't want the lender to make it a requirement. Okay? Now, if you want to, if they ask you for the report and you want to give it to them, you don't want to counter it out, you still have to counter and state from the beginning that the seller will not do any clearances, and any termite clearance in order to close escrow is going to be the responsibility of the buyer. Okay? So, yeah, if I'm a listing agent, I'm getting rid of it altogether. I'm not going to have it in there. And if I want to give them one, I'll give them one, but I'm not going to have it as part of the contract where it's required. I'm only going to make it required if I ultimately have one. Now, if you have one, you're required to give it to them. Anything that you guys have as a listing agent, if you had an escrow that fell out and you have a previous termite report, a previous home inspection report, any kind of inspections that were done, and you have a copy of those report, you're required to give those disclosures over to the new buyer. Okay, so don't hide anything from them. But I don't want it stated in here. That's what we're getting at. Okay?
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing. This is who's going to be responsible for making sure those things are done. Always check seller. Always check seller. The reason for that is because they've changed the offer, and now the offer has a very specific, we saw in the time periods, the seller has a very specific amount of time to do those things. It's got to be done in the first 7 days. The buyer's not going to have access probably to do those things. They probably don't even know if they're done or not. So this is the seller's responsibility. Okay? So always seller. The next one, Q5 and 6, these are the city pre-sale inspections. Compton, Maywood, Linwood, Huntington Park, Southgate, right? That's this. That's what this is. Government required point of sale inspections and reports. That's what that is. You don't need to write up here pre-sale inspection report. You don't have to write in here, by the way, just to go back to this, don't write professional home inspection and check off buyer on here. It's in the contract already. The buyer has the right to do that. You don't need to put in there that the buyer is doing one. All it does is, again, makes your offer look messy and makes the listing agent look at your offer a different way because it makes it seem like you don't know what you're doing. And also the city pre-sale inspection reports don't need to go here because they have their own spot. Q5 and 6 are going to reference what happens with any of those pre-sale requirements from any of the cities that require it in Southern California, and there's a lot. So I'm always going to check seller because there is not one that I know of that allows the buyer to go and order that report. Okay? Now, I'm going to ask for the seller to order that report. They should do it. I know there's pushback from listing agents and from sellers. It's by this time, we're so far into having these pre-sale inspection reports that this shouldn't be an issue any longer. I know it still is, but it shouldn't be. But I'm always going to ask for seller. Now, if I already know, because I've spoken to the listing agent, listing agent says, yes, we've got the report, we're going to give you the report, but we want buyers to take responsibility. Then guess what I'm going to do if I know already, or if I'm willing to do it, then I'm going to check off buyer on this section because this is the corrective and remedial actions, which means whatever needs to be corrected from this inspection report, right? So I get the city of Southgate, they tell me what needs to be corrected, those corrections get done. If I know as buyer I'm going to be the one taking it on, or I want to improve the strength of my offer by saying, hey, seller, give me the report, I'll do the work, then I check the box. If I don't know that I can or don't want to do that, then obviously my offer is going to write that the seller is going to provide the report and do the clearance. Let them counter me back on that point. That's one of the ones where it's up to you. If your buyer is hesitant to say, no, I don't want to take it on, let the seller come back and counter you and let your buyer then make a decision based on whether or not they want the property. But if I know already and my buyer's willing to do that corrective work, I'm going to check the box buyer when I send the offer in. So it makes one less thing for the listing agent to worry about and try to counter and explain. Okay. Questions about the pre-sale in this section that we're talking about writing the offer? Anybody? No, you guys all understand it 100%? Okay. All right. So I'm going to leave this offer this way. We're agreeing to pay for it, so we're going to leave it alone. Escrow fee. I always see, well, I don't always see. I can't explain to you how many times I see both, which is not correct. The correct is each to pay their own fees. Okay? Each to pay their own fees. If you get an offer that is not written that way, you counter it. But if, again, you want to write your offer clean and correct, each to pay their own fees. That's always the right one. Not both. Not seller. Not buyer. Seller. Now, if the buyer wants to pay all the escrow fees, if the buyer has the money to do it, can't qualify for a higher amount as far as the sales price goes, but they have the money to pay costs, then maybe you check off the buyer and say, hey, I'll pay your escrow fees, maybe reducing their fees, even though you can't go up on price, but you can reduce their overhead, or you can increase their net. Maybe that makes your offer a little bit more powerful. Most people can't do that, so it's each to pay their own. You pay your own fees, that's what it is. And please don't miss over here where it says escrow holder. Again, seller's choice is the norm. Seller's choice should be the norm. Again, you could ask for your own escrow company. It doesn't work a lot, but I have seen it work, right? It could be that, you know, the seller lives far away, or the escrow company, the listing is somewhere else, the buyer's going to spend. It could work. So it's up to you if you want to make that request of having your escrow company. But 99% of the deals are going to get countered back as seller's choice of services, or they're going to dictate their own escrow company. Now, the nice thing about seller's choice is that it doesn't create a counter. And I know sometimes you still get a counter from a listing agent that says this is the escrow holder and all that. That's usually because they're doing a blanket counter. They're not doing specific counters for each offer. They have some kind of a boilerplate counter offer that they're using, so they just use the same terms over and over again. But what this does by doing seller's choice is it eliminates them from having to provide a counter about the service. Okay. Owner's title insurance policy. Always seller, not both. Seller. The buyer has their own lender's title insurance policy, and that's what that refers to down here. So it's not like the escrow where it's each their own fees. It has a separate section. So it's always the seller. But again, like we said with escrow, if your buyer has the cash, right, they have the funds to be able to pay some of the closing costs, you could request, or you could offer to pay for their title insurance also. But that's not the norm. Seller is the norm. And again, right here, seller's choice. They're going to pick their title company. I know it would be wonderful for us as buyer's agents, because as buyer's agents, our title officers help us, our title reps help us just as much as they do when we're a listing agent, and we want to reward them when we can, and you will. When you get a listing, you'll reward them by using them as the title, just like this listing agent is going to do on the offer that we're writing. So for now, seller's choice. Remember, we're trying to write a strong offer. We're trying to write a clean and a strong offer, and this is the way to do it. Buyer's lender title insurance policy. So an owner's title insurance policy, we know, is an insurance policy to make sure that the title is clear to transfer from the seller to the buyer. The buyer's lender, the buyer's lender policy is to make sure that the buyer doesn't have any liens that are going to get attached to the home once they complete the purchase. So they run their name. That's why we do the SI. They run their name through the general index, just like they do with the property and the seller. And they make sure that there's no pending liens or liens that are out there, that once that person is a homeowner, that judgment or whatever that lien is can get attached to the property, because it then puts the position of the lender in jeopardy, and that lender always has to be in first position as far as liens and encumbrances go. Okay, so that's what that title insurance policy pays for, and that's why it's the buyer's responsibility, and that's why it's defaulted to that. Okay, questions about the title insurance policies and the escrow fees? Darwin, you unmuted. Did you have a question?
Yes, boss. How about if they want to corner you back, saying both in the owner title insurance? Because I see that. And I
Okay,
have some,
but both what that you got to figure.
like
You
both,
can't
each
just
piece will pay their own title.
yeah,
So
but that again, it doesn't make any sense because here's their title insurance, there's their title insurance. They're two separate title insurances and they have their own thing. So if they put both, what they're saying then is that you're going to pay a portion of their title insurance plus you're going to pay your own. So if you accept that like that, then it's going to be more cost to your buyer. Now, if you can't explain that to the listing agent and get it repaired, then and you want the property, you'll have to accept it that way, and then you'll have to figure out what that cost is going to be to your buyer. But it can't just be both. You have to write something in there besides the both, because that owner's title insurance policy doesn't have any portion of it that's paid by the seller. So you'd have to say both 50%, right? 70%, 30, whatever it is, you'd have to come up with a percentage. And again, this is why it's super important for listing agents to understand the contract better than a buyer's agent, because then listing agents do stupid stuff like that and check off both on the owner's title insurance policy, and then escrow doesn't know how to act. So now it creates another escrow instruction or an amendment or an addendum, and it just gets messier. So it's understanding. As a buyer's agent, you learn how to write a good offer and a clean offer. When you become a listing agent, then you understand what to look at and how to counter and make sure that the offer is clean. You're the backup. So if you're a shitty buyer's agent, pardon my language, then you're going to be a pretty crappy listing agent. It's just the truth, because you're not going to know the contract and you're going to do things like that. But there's nothing you could do. You could put it back on the counter to say that you're not going to pay any of the owner's title policy, that you're only going to pay the buyer's lender policy. But then what happens is you put yourself in jeopardy. So,
and that's a little hard to explain those agents. And I went through that a few times, boss, that exactly what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Then you might have to accept it and deal with whatever those consequences go. But you have to explain that to your buyer, that we're doing something that you're not supposed to do. It's not done correctly. We have to accept to get your offer accepted. And at some point, it's going to come back that we're going to have to negotiate this. So if they want to still go forward, then you go forward. That's it. All right. County transfer tax and fees. The norm is the seller. The city transfer tax and fees. The norm is the seller. If you want to do, hey, we're split it, you could do the both, but again, you have to say both 50-50. You have to put the 50, you can't just say both. Now, it's an escrow can't assume what both means. Right? So if I'm going to say, hey, I'll take on 50% of the county and the city transfer tax, then I have to put that in there to tell them I'm taking on half. If I leave it as just both, the escrow is not allowed to assume we mean half and half. Okay? So the norm on this, though, is the seller. It should be the norm. Most people don't argue it. There's not pushback. It's a very normal part. They already knew it was in their costs, the whole thing. So check the seller. It's fine. Going back to what we said before about having some of the extra, maybe have a little extra cash, just not the qualifications on the price. I could, as buyer, offer to pay those costs for them, and again, reduce their costs, maybe increase their net, making my offer slightly stronger. So look at these as options besides just raising the price. Okay? But the norm, seller, and that's what we're going to do. Questions about that? Any questions? Okay. HOA fee for preparing the disclosures. Yes, Jasmine, go ahead.
Hi, Kyle. Regarding the city transfer fees,
Mm-hmm.
I know there was a new rule regarding any certain sales price. The rate was gonna be like 4%. Has that applied to any, sales price, or is the norm depending on the city, or is that
No,
escrow
well, there's only a
dollars?
couple. There's only a couple cities that have it, like Culver City Culver City or Century City, L.A., Santa Monica. None of the cities around here. Like if you're selling Downey, Long Beach, whatever, there's no city transfer tax. The county transfer tax is the same in Orange County and LA County. I think it's the same in San Bernardino and Riverside. It's $1.10 per thousand. So if I sell a house for 500,000, you take 500, you times it by $1.10, and that'll give you $550. I should have been able to do that in my head, but that gives you a $550 tax for the county. The city of LA is $4.10, I think, per thousand.
Oh my
And
God.
so you got to add that on to the top. So if that were the case on the $500,000 sales price, you're talking about another $2,000. So
Yeah, because I work in Northeast LA, which is part of City of LA, even though they're Eagle Rock, Highland Park, all those areas.
yeah,
And those are part of City LA, but those houses here are like over $1 million. They're not
yeah.
500,000. They're
No,
like
I understand that. I'm
1.5,
just doing that
1.6.
as math. But yes, they're going to pay that transfer tax, both the county and the city.
So it's 4.25, you said? Four and a, or
I
four
think
and a
it's 410. I always forget the
410.
number, and we've talked about it. And then I look it up, I get it, and then I always come up with that same number. But it's around $4 per thousand.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. But that's the norm. Is the seller's going to pay that? So just check the seller off. But again, like we said, it is an option. If your buyer has the ability to pay it, to reduce their cost and increase their net, I could offer to pay it. Okay? HOA fee that's defaulted to the seller. That's for prepping the disclosures, right? Whatever it costs to pay the homeowners association to get all those documents together, that's for the seller to pay for. The certification fee to make sure that the property is certified and the lender approves it, that's always defaulted to the buyer. Okay? The transfer fees, now that could be negotiated, buyer or seller or both. Again, if I'm going to check both, then I got to dictate what that means, right? If I'm not, I would normally, this transfer fee is the seller's fee, and it's a norm. It's a norm. Now, if there's like this, seller shall pay for separate HOA move-out fee, buyer shall pay for move-in fee. So they could have a transfer fee, right, where it's like, hey, this is the cost of transferring from one homeowner to another. They could also have a fee for you moving out, Mr. Seller, and me moving in as the buyer. And those two fees are going to be billed differently and don't fall under this transfer fee. Okay? So just so you know, they put that disclaimer in there. But the norm is the seller. Again, I could pay it if I wanted to as the buyer as an option to increase the net to the seller and make my offer a little bit stronger. But by default, always go with seller. It's normal. People aren't going to really balk at it. 3Q15, private transfer fees. The default is seller, or if checked, buyer or both, and then how they're going to pay that. Now, a private transfer fee in the majority of the homes that we sell in our market areas, and I know that we're expanding and we're reselling maybe for the first time some new construction in outer areas, and out some of the outlying areas. And that private transfer fee generally only falls to those new construction when it's the first resale. Those developers, they build in a private transfer fee, and it's in their paperwork. And when they sell the property, they have to pay that fee back to the developer for the sale of the property. That's why the default on it is the seller. But if I'm doing a house that was built in the 50s and it's right here across the street in Downey, or it's in Pico or in Norwalk and, you know, Whittier, and those places built in the 60s and they're not in a PUD or some kind of development, the chances of the private transfer fee existing are very slim. So you can leave that as it is on the default to the sellers, okay? Next up, these are any fees or costs. So remember earlier I said to you, if you're going to request the termite report up here, that is only the report. If I'm going to ask for the costs, then I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put wood destroying pest clearance. And then I'm going to check off seller right there. Now, with this is the only cost or fee that I will accept not going in there. You can put it here if you need the room. This is also where if there was some other thing that I wanted to pay for that wasn't here at the beginning, that's already checked off, I would ask for the seller to pay for that there too. But if I want my client, for example, my buyer, to pay for the transaction coordinator, it is going to be written this way. Commission, not fee. Not fee. It is not a fee. It is a commission. Transaction coordinator commission, TC commission, whatever it is, I need to put it there for my buyer. And the reason I need to put it in, if I want that to be part of their cost when they close, where they pay it through escrow, it has to be in the offer. If it's not in the offer, 99.9% of escrows are not going to accept the buyer paying it ahead of time. Okay. Now that's an optional thing. You guys all know my thing is, if I was selling today and I'm using my transaction coordinator, that would be my fee. That's just how I feel about it. But this is how you charge the client. This is how you're going to charge the client. Okay. So we'll do that. So any other fees or costs that we need to negotiate that we want the seller to pay for, that's where they would go. Yes, Jesus, go ahead.
Yes, it sounds like the TC is charging the commission, which is not. Does the company? Why shouldn't it be a fee?
Because we have to think about how RESPA works, and I'm charging them a fee, an additional fee for something that you're supposed to be doing as part of the commission that you're getting. So basically what we're saying is they're paying this additional commission as a bonus for having that person that is their communication, that they're helping them through the file. We're trying to look, here's the honest truth. You guys probably shouldn't be charging for it, but we are. The agents are doing it, so this is the correct way to do it if you want to do it through escrow. That's it.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Darwin.
But if I pay the commission, I don't have to write it down, right? They just go
If you pay it from your commission, no,
Yes.
you don't have to.
Thanks.
All right. Next, home warranty. So any other additional things that you'd want the seller to pay for or the buyer to pay for, you would put it in here, check it off. Home warranty plan. I had this conversation last week with an agent. So they wrote in here $900. They checked off seller. They didn't have their. I don't think they had their. Oh, no, they did. They had their service provider, right? So let's say it's First American that we want. So it's $900, or that cost I think was older. Whatever it is, First American. Okay. So First American, I put $900. I need to put in here the coverages that dictate this amount, because the base price is like $475. So if I just want the basic home warranty, then I need to make sure that my prices make sense. Because if I ask for $900 but I don't ask for anything here, that's fine. But as a listing agent, then I have to show it as a net of, I have to show that against my seller's net as $900 being paid. Like the agent that I talked to about it said, oh, well, what we do is we just work it out with escrow afterwards. It's like, no, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. You have to put in here what things are getting paid. You can't just say an escrow is not, shouldn't. If I put $900, but I have no coverages here, right? I don't have anything, just a home warranty plan, and escrow does anything other than order a basic home warranty, then escrow is putting themselves in a pretty tricky position. I need some written instruction from the seller agreeing to pay that, because it says not to exceed $900. Well, this coverage, this basic coverage, is not going to exceed $900. It's going to be $475, and that's all escrow should be paying. But just in case, if I'm seller and I get an offer that says $900 up here, I'm not going to give them the opportunity to negotiate something. I'm going to counter back and say, I will pay X amount for a basic home warranty policy. Okay. But if I'm going to get the 900, I don't know what the things are called now, right? The platinum or whatever, platinum plus, let's call it. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, what they're called. So this is what I'm asking for. So now let's say that the platinum plus on this property is 900. Now I'm saying I'm asking for 900 because I want platinum plus. So now as the listing agent, I have the choice when I get an offer like that to be able to counter back and say, listen, we'll give you the platinum plus, but we're only paying a maximum of $500. The buyer to be responsible for any balance. I just put it back on you if you want that one. Or you could just say, okay, we'll take a basic home warranty and deal with, paying the difference afterwards. The other thing that you need to do, and this is where this is the one time where it's okay to ask for your service, and the seller still might counter you, but a lot of times sellers don't on home warranties because they know that the person that's using the service is the buyer, right? So a lot of times they allow you to use your own. When you do this though, you have to make sure that, and apologize to Rebecca if she sees this, I forgot her last name right now while we're typing. Type in her name, right? So if it's here, it's Rebecca, and I can't remember her last name. If it's Old Republic, then it's Gloria Navarro.
Tejada.
Oh, thank you. Right? So put your rep's name in there, because when I'm writing an offer and I'm using an outside escrow, if I just put Old Republic or I just put First American in there, they're going to assign it to their rep, and your rep doesn't get the credit. So please make sure you're putting the representatives, whether it's Gloria or it's Rebecca, right? If is it Tejada or Tejeda? Tejada. So if I'm putting it in, now what's going to happen is escrow is going to give her the credit when they order the first. And now I know that our TCs usually order the home warranty, but sometimes they don't. And I don't want anybody else to not give people the credit that they're supposed to. So just make sure it's completely filled out. Do it the right way. Ask for whatever coverages you're asking for. If there's specific things that you're asking for that maybe aren't covered by those big general policies, put in there that I want roof and pool and AC or whatever the case is. Put the description of the coverages that you're asking for. Okay? Questions? Anybody have any questions about that part, the home warranty? All right. Other terms. Other terms is where I'm going to write anything else in. Like if I didn't have a space up here and I wanted the seller to pay for the termite clearance, I would put here would destroying pest inspection. Can I type inspection, repairs, and clearance? I could put that in there, and the reason I could put that in there and not this is because this is a very specific amount. This is generally fees and costs for something that is a very specific amount. This, we don't know what this is until we get the report back. All we want them to do is agree to be responsible for it. So if I do what I told you not to and ask for the report up here, you have to do this and ask for the pest inspection, repairs, and clearance here. Okay? Now, besides that, this would be if I were representing myself or another agent, then I would write in here, seller to be aware, buyer is a licensed real estate agent in the state of California. And if you works here or you work here, right, and is affiliated with Century 21 All Stars, right? I'm gonna put that. If it's me, I'm gonna put. I'm gonna add in. That's it. Well, spelling things wrong. My typing is horrible, so you guys all get to witness it live. How bad I am at typing. So I'm gonna put those things in and make sure that that's disclosed from the beginning. I'm not gonna wait until later. This is really important to make sure that I'm making this disclosure in my offer. Okay, so if I'm writing an offer for myself, I'm writing an offer for somebody here that I work with, I'm writing another offer for another agent, I gotta make this disclosure when I write my offer. Now, if I am related, okay, if I'm related to the buyer, so to be aware, buyer is related to the agent, the real estate agent acting as buyer's agent. And that's it. I don't have to tell them what the relationship is, just related. Okay? So I have to make that disclosure also. You're required to tell them if you're related to the person. You could probably go a little bit farther. If you're related to the lender that's doing the loan too, you might want to put that in there. It's but if you guys are related, if you're in a relationship, if you're living together, whatever the case is, that needs to go in. You have to disclose that from the beginning. It could be a pretty big violation if we don't disclose that relationship, and it's a huge problem if you don't disclose that you're licensed. Also, if it's a corporation, because people think they can slip around things by using their corporation. If my corporation is purchasing the property and I'm an officer, I'm not the one signing, but I am an officer of that corporation, I have to disclose that also. Seller to be aware, agent representing buyers, is officer of the corporation that is acting as principal. So I have to put that in. I have to put that in. I have to disclose that. I can't get around the idea that the corporation that I'm an officer in is purchasing a piece of property, even though I'm not signing it, but I'm acting as the agent. I have to disclose that. That is just as bad, if not worse, that I'm hiding that I'm part of the corporation that's making the purchase than writing my name, because at least they see my name, right? Like, you can make an argument that, well, I didn't disclose it because they knew, because here's my name as agent, my name as buyer, so I didn't disclose it. You still have to. Don't make that argument. I'm just saying that argument could be made to defend yourself if you make that mistake and miss it. This one can't, because there's no way for them to know that you were part of that corporation, and if something goes wrong and you hid that from them, it's going to be a huge issue for you. Okay? So this other terms section This other terms section is basically just anything I need to make sure that the seller knows that I didn't have a space for previously in paragraph 3. Okay? Questions? We finished paragraph 3, so any questions before I move on? Because we're going to move kind of quickly now to finish up. Anybody? All right. These are any of the addenda that we need to include in there. So if it's a probate, we have to have the probate agreement purchase addendum is attached. The manufactured home, if I'm writing an offer on a mobile home or a manufactured home. The tenants in common purchase addendum, you're not going to have to deal with that around here too much. Right, so any of these addendums, short sale addendum, backup offer addendum, anything that I'm incorporating in my offer because I know it needs to be done, I'm going to check off those boxes. If you know you have to do it, check the boxes. Go through and check the boxes. Yes, Jasmine, you have a question.
Yes, Kyle, really quick, just before you move on to this section, does that go the same? So if you have a listing and you are representing a relative or you're related to the seller,
Yes.
when they send you an RPA, you have to counter what you just
Yes.
put on the paperwork on
Yes.
display. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, same thing, especially if you're an officer of the corporation, even if you're not signing on behalf of the corporation, it goes both ways. That disclosure needs to be made to the buyer from the seller. So yes, good question, Jasmine. Okay, so just make sure that if you need any of these, and there's a lot of them to go through, and we're not going to talk about, we talk about the addendums and the amendments in other classes. So just know that if you need to incorporate one of these, make sure that the box is checked here, okay? We're not going to go through all this because we're not going to explain terms. We're talking about writing an offer at this point. So we're going to skip down to the next section that you would be filling out. So don't get too dizzy looking at this because there's a lot of pages to go through. Here we go. Almost there, I think. All right. First off, liquidated damages. You got to explain the liquidated damages to your buyer. This is them initialing that they're agreeing that if they default on the contract that they're gonna forfeit their deposit up to 3%, a maximum of 3% of the purchase price. That doesn't mean that it's going to be up to 3%. It means that that deposit is limited to 3% of the purchase price. So if somebody, for whatever reason, if somebody wants to put a 6% of the sales price initial deposit in, and then there's a dispute resolution, there's a liquidated damages claim, they would only lose 50% of that. They would only lose 3%. But it's limited to whatever your initial deposit is. So it's not going to exceed that. So if my initial deposit is $5,000 as a buyer, and I lose a liquidated damages complaint, right? I have to pay my deposit. I only have to pay the $5,000. They can't go and say, no, you owe me 3% of the purchase price. That's not how it works. Okay. Anything that exceeds 3% that's in escrow, that's deposit in escrow, must be released, even if they are allowed to keep the deposit. Now, the liquidated damages is only for 1 to 4 unit properties where the buyer is going to live in one of the properties. Okay, so think about that. If I have an investor that's purchasing a property, not living in one of them, 1 to 4 units, liquidated damages does not protect their 3%. They're not protected by that 3%. If a seller can prove damages, the seller can go after them for whatever amount they want to. But it does flip it the other way, that it also doesn't automatically give the seller the deposit because of the forfeit or because of the breach. Again, I'd have to prove damages then if it was a 1 to 4 unit property with an investor purchasing. So keep that in mind. Okay. Questions about liquidated damages. That's it. So it's up to your buyer and the seller to initial. The buyer isn't required to initial it. We would suggest they do because it makes their offer look stronger, but they're not required to unless the seller gets the offer and in part of the counter says, in order for us to accept, you have to initial paragraph 29. then they would be required to. But you can't have an offer that is initialed by the seller and not initialed by the buyer, or vice versa, buyer and not seller. That can't happen. It has to be stated one way or the other. So if we accept an offer and the seller didn't initial that and we get it back, there's got to be something in writing saying that this is not, liquidated damage is not part of the contract, or seller acknowledges and initials it. You can't have either one or the other initial and not both. Okay? The next section you're going to initial is the arbitration of disputes. We're not going to talk about the whole arbitration of disputes, but basically what it's saying is if I initial this, I'm going to go through mediation arbitration for any dispute that the buyer and seller has, as opposed to if I don't initial this, I'm going to go mediation litigation, right? So instead of a mediator and then an arbitrator, which is kind of the same process, I would go mediator and then in front of a judge or in front of a jury. Okay, that's the only thing that we're doing here. The buyer has the right to decide, do I want to go mediation arbitration or mediation litigation? The difference in cost and the difference in time is negligible. Right now it's probably a lot faster just because of how courts are after COVID. It's probably a lot faster to go through mediation arbitration than it is through litigation, but it's not much less expensive. So again, that becomes a personal choice to your buyer unless the seller is forcing you to through a counter. And again, just like liquidated damages, it can't be initialed by only one party. So there has to be some acknowledgement that if one party initialed it and the other didn't, that they both agreed to not initial it, or that they both agreed to initial it. You can't leave it one not and one did. Okay? Questions about that? Not about what constitutes dispute resolution and what goes and what doesn't. Just about initials and not initialing and the conversation. Any questions? Okay. And let's see. You know what? I knew I did skip a part, and I want to go back. Oh, no, that's on the listing contract. Never mind. Sorry, I didn't. Confused myself. Okay. Expiration of the offer. By default, we already talked about it. This offer expires in 3 days, unless you changed it and it references back here to 3C. If this is an entity buyer, like we talked about with a corporation purchasing the property, then I would check off this entity buyers here. I would do that, entity buyers, and then I would put who's authorized to sign on behalf. So if it wasn't me as a purchaser, I would put the names of the people who were authorized to sign. Jasmine, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, Kyle, really quick on liquidating damages. Only if the buyer signed the release of contingencies, that's when we go into that degree of debating where the deposit.
That's the only way to. It's cut and dry. Like there's no gray. It's black and white. If I removed all my contingencies and I cancel as buyer, it's black and white. I'm supposed to release my deposit.
Right. But what about if they don't?
Well, but then it still becomes a negotiation. Then I'm going to say the liquidated damages, the protection of the 3% exists. That stays. That doesn't disappear. It's just now I as seller have to prove the breach. That's the only difference.
Okay. And that's for escrow. Well, we know escrow can decide that, so we would have to take it to arbitration or mediation, or
depending on the amount of the deposit, yeah, it would either go small claims or mediation, and then arbitration or mediation litigation. But it's dependent on the amount of the deposit.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this is where I would write in. So let's just say there was that I was an entity, and it won't let you put it in unless it's not letting me type in here. There we go. Let's just say that I was a corporation, and so the signer, instead of me, it's Richard or it's Laura, right? Like I'm going to put the name of who's signing, because then what'll happen is, oh, I forgot we have and or assignee still. What'll happen is that person's name will go there and they will sign on my behalf. You see what and then you put what their title is. successor trustee or administrator if it was a probate, right? So this is what would happen. So let's just say that we're a probate, okay? We're an entity buyer. It's a probate. Buyers can't buy probates. What am I talking about? I'm a corporation, okay? So it's Kyle Strata Inc. Okay, so John Smith is the officer of my corporation. Okay, so now what's going to happen is John Smith, who is the officer, is going to sign on my behalf. It'll be John Smith's signature here, and it'll still be Kyle Strata Inc. But if there is no entity, then we're going to uncheck this. We're going to uncheck this box, and then take out this title, and it'll just be my signature. The and or assignee, you don't need to sign on it. Okay? We don't need an additional signature addendum. I don't know how many buyers we had up there. I forgot, but I must have not cleared it off. Okay? So don't worry about the and or assignee if it's there. Just sign your buyer's name if they're the only actual person that's there to sign. All right. If there are more than 2 signers, then we are going to include the additional signature addendum. And that third person, let's go back up here to the top real quick. Sorry, I know this doesn't look weird. Where's the... No, we just had and or assignee. All right. But if there was a third buyer, then we would do the additional signature addendum here, and that third buyer's name would be the only one that would go on the additional signature addendum. Okay, this is the acceptance. That's when we get it back. This is for the sellers to fill out, not us. Seller signature. That's it. But buyer's agent, make sure this is correct. Make sure this is all correct, and see this designated electronic delivery addresses, check all that apply. This right here is what's going to show that you're receiving things and start the time period so everybody's on the same page. So I'm going to do an email above and either text or alternate email and maybe put a different email address in there, or just text and phone number from above. But make sure that all this is filled out properly. Make sure this is all there, so that way you could do that. Now, if for some reason, let's say that there was another, another person that was with me, then I would check off more than one agent, and it would incorporate another form that shows there's an additional agent from this office. So just make sure you're doing those things correctly if you're doing that, right? If you're going to have 2 of you guys who are representing the buyer, or if another broker and you are representing the buyer, you can put all their information in, and then there's an additional broker acknowledgement form that the seller also and the buyer also have to sign to acknowledge that they're working with 2 separate brokers. But the 2 buyers, most common is you have 2 buyers agents that are working here in the same office. Okay, if you have the information for the listing office, right, make sure that we had that in there from there. Fill in what you can. We're not doing that because there's not more than one brokerage. And that's it. Make sure the stuff is just complete, though. Okay? So we did it. We got to the end. We do it a little over after 12 o'clock. Does anybody have any questions before I let you guys go? And later today, this will be on YouTube. You guys can take a look at it. If you guys have, questions for me, you can come to me directly and ask. But for those of you that missed any part of it, you can go back, review, look at the YouTube video, and kind of take some time and dissect it. Yes, Jasmine, go ahead.
Really quick, just when we write offers and it happens to be sold by an investor, we only see the LLC. We write up the offers under the LLC. We don't know anything about the officers. Are we supposed to email the agents and say, give me the officer's name from the corporation, or we just write the offer?
You're talking about if the seller is an LLC?
Yeah.
No, they'll do. That's their responsibility. You write your offer for your buyer. You don't need to get all that. They'll do that.
Oh, But when we put the seller's information, we just put a
Yeah, just put the LLC. That's it. They'll
LLC on there.
answer with the entity, seller, and all that stuff. They'll do that,
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
or they should. Marisol, you unmuted. Did you have a question?
Yes. I'm
Yeah.
For the home warranty, if we do it exactly, put all the information, but then they counter saying like only for a certain amount and seller's choice, is that norm or is that
No, I mean it's not. Usually, the listing agents allow the buyers to get in. What you would do would be, I'm going to counter the price, the amount that we're willing to pay. They would do that, and then that way let you figure out what you want to pay over for the coverages, right? Because somebody would have to pay it. But if they lower the amount and say that they're going to give their service, like their company, then you have to go back to your buyer and say, okay, they're saying they're picking their company, they're lowering the amount, which means we're not going to get this coverage. Are you okay with that? And if they are, then you accept it and you move on. You just have to know you're not getting that coverage that you had originally requested. If you want to go back with another buyer's counteroffer and say, well, coverage to be comparable to that and buyer to pay the difference because you wanted that coverage for a reason, that's up to you. You could do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? All right, great. Well, thank you guys for sitting through 3 weeks of writing an offer. Hopefully, this makes you a stronger buyer's agent, gives you a better opportunity at getting your offers accepted for your buyers, because I know it's not easy out there. Again, if you missed any of this, it's on YouTube. Go check it out. You can look at the past videos too, so you can get the whole complete picture if you missed any of those. And I really appreciate you guys being here. So take care of yourselves. Go out there and be productive.